Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Entrepreneur's Playbook, where we help 7- and 8-figure business owners ignite their financial superpowers. Josh Bowerly here with Ron Parisi as always. Ron, how you doing today?
Doing great, Josh. Look forward
Awesome.
to our next podcast.
Yeah. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what our topic is today?
So, a topic I've been getting a lot of questions on, and I think is a timely topic for what's going on in the industry, and that's exit strategy and planning for your exit and how planning. I think the big piece is how planning for your exit should be a good way of running your business nonetheless. So what I guess we've learned from helping people with their exits and bringing that to their everyday running of the business. Yep.
Awesome. Yeah, I can say I'm a CPA, so this should be like just inherent to me. But I've exited 2 companies now, and I look back and think, man, if I was more prepared, I could have done this so much better. So yeah, everybody should be thinking about this. So is there how you can sum this up? 3 tips maybe on what people should be doing to prepare for this?
Yeah, sure. First of all, Josh, I don't know anybody that went through an exit that said that couldn't have gone better. There's always
Sure.
pieces. That's part of the negotiation, right? You could have been prepared. You didn't know which way the direction. So don't beat yourself up. But what we can do is definitely be as prepared as possible and understand that it is a negotiation. But so anyway, today, I summarize this in 3 ways, right? 1 is always be ready. 2 is how we change complex to simple. And then the 3 is the power of story and what story is your financials telling about the business. So let's broke it down into 3 areas for us to talk about today.
Cool. Let's hit us with the first one here.
Yeah. I alluded to this earlier, but I think just running a business is part of it is always being ready for the exit. I think a lot of people in their mind are like, oh, I'm going to exit when I'm ready to retire, or I'm going to exit when I get to a certain dollar figure and I can get a certain multiple. And they have these notes in their head about when that exit's going to happen. And the reality of it is we don't know when the exit's going to happen. And if you run a solid company, there could be a competitor, there could be a new player, there could be somebody in a whole nother industry that sees something that you're doing that they can align with. With my clients, man, people have come knocking on their door completely unprepared or unexpected, I should say. And luckily, I think a couple of them were prepared, a couple of them weren't. But again, you don't know when the opportunity is going to knock. So I think it's always a good idea to be ready for it. So.
Yeah, it's like in a morbid way, it's similar to like your own life. Like you don't know when that's going to end, so you have to be prepared for the end, right? You have to have your people that depend on you taken care of with life insurance and all that. Yeah, I think it's similar. If you have a business, maybe you have no plans to sell in the next 5 years, 10 years, 50 years, or whatever, but you have no idea what's going to happen. Being prepared seems like the logical thing to do.
Can I just jump in there real quick? I think we all can agree that we really don't know what the future holds, right? Everything around us is changing so dramatically. The global landscape, technology with all the algorithms. It seems every area, particularly healthcare, what I'm seeing in healthcare and longevity, it just blows you away. And so we know, I don't think we can take anything for granted or know anything about the future at this point. I would say nothing. No, but I'm just saying, always be ready for how the future could change.
Yeah, and I'll say for me personally, both companies I sold, 6 months before I sold it, I had no intentions of selling it. It wasn't even on the horizon. So you just never know. But yeah, I like that one. What's number 2?
Number 2 is complex to simple. And what I mean by that is we talk about as your company grows, right? Maybe it was you doing a side hustle when you had your 9 to 5, or it was back in the day where it was just you and your EA or VA. And now it's a 10-person, 20-person, 50-person company. What's happened is you've gone from simple to complex, right? Very few companies grow without increasing their complexity. Different revenue streams, more people, more clients, different whole host of issues as you go up that escalator. And I think the important part of the exit strategy is being able to take this complex company and being able to simplify it for your prospective buyer. And what is that? This goes beyond an elevator speech, but it's really just trying to simplify everything that you're doing with the company. What are your plans? What have you been able to do? Your profitability drivers, like being able, everything needs to be simplified, and being able to be simply communicate or easily communicated to the buyer. And I just feel like the tighter the presentation decks are, the tighter the messages, the easier it is for the seller to be able to communicate the value of the business. There's a lot to be taken into consideration, but I just feel like that's number one priority, is being able to communicate that value simply. And just take a step back here, right? Who's really buying your company? It's usually there's a front person, but usually behind that front person, there's people that you may not get to meet. And if you are going to meet them, it's going to be later in the process. So it's like how well you can educate the front person that you're dealing with to the backers. And I don't know if that's like the VC guys, the hedge fund, the angel guys, whoever's like behind these guys, or maybe it's just his board or her board, right? But always being able to simplify that message and allow that person who's come to you be able to deliver that message to the people behind them. Does that make sense? Yeah.
It does make sense. Yeah. The more complex you make it, the harder it's going to be to sell. And especially, and it depends on what you're like. If one CPA buys another CPA firm, smaller one, yeah, that can be somewhat simple because they all understand, they all speak the same language. But a lot of exit strategies aren't like that, right? Like you were talking about, there's VCs and there's boards, and they may not have a specialty in your business. They just need to know the basics and the value, and you got to be able to communicate that with them simply.
Yeah. And two is that what I see sometimes is people, they see what you're doing with the business and they say, oh, I have another marketing technique, or I have another process that I could bring to this company to really elevate its progress. So maybe they don't know exactly what you do, but they feel like they have a tool to be able to really increase the success of your business. Again, a lot of it's educating the seller or the buyer, and being able to allow that front person to be able to sell your company to others. So,
yep, that makes sense. Yeah. So what do you get for number 3?
This is the power of story. And I think this is the most important one. And that's, everybody likes to tell their story about their business, right? About their passions, why they got into it, what they were trying to accomplish. And while that's extremely important, but most likely the buyer wants to know how they're going to make money off your business. And so these storylines, the origination story is extremely important, but you almost have to look, what's the story you're telling through the financials, through the eyes of someone looking at your financials. And I think this is the biggest piece. Always be ready, because you can't start telling that story once somebody knocks on your door. You always need to be thinking in your head, what are my financials telling me about my company? And this could be a lot of different things, but if you have big swings in income, big swings in expenses, buyers want to see predictable, right? They want to see upswings. They want to see upward trajectory. So this just kind of building consistency, and a lot of it has to do more with the accounting than actually the performance of their business. People let their accounting get away, and it's all a jumbled mess. There's no consistency with the recording of revenue and expenses. And then I think a big piece too is watching your personal expenses, people buying expensive cars and big trips and things like that, and really suppressing the income. And we know why they do that, but from the eyes of a buyer, you just suppress your income, and why you could say these were personal expenses. A lot of them don't take that into consideration when they look at your EBITDA and you look at your multiple. I think looking through the lens of a buyer through your financials and what the story of your financials are super, super important, and probably the most important piece of the exit strategy, because the buyer ultimately wants to make money with your business.
Yeah, no, I love this one. I actually just did a presentation recently for real estate agents, real estate brokers, about how to build a business that you can sell. And a similar comparison along these lines I showed them was, think of, you're a real estate agent, right? And think of a house you go into. You're going to list this house, and it's in this great neighborhood, and there's comps showing it should sell for $500,000. You're really excited, and you get there, but you get inside and it's a hoarder house, right? There's stuff everywhere. You can't see the walls, you can't see the floors. And the seller wants to say, oh, just tell the buyers, no, after this stuff gets cleaned out, it's basically the same as all these other ones that have sold. It's worth that much. And it doesn't work like that. It's worth what people see, right? So you can tell your people, oh, I know the financials say this, but trust me, after we take out all these expenses, and it's really profitable. Or even worse, I know I don't have really good financial systems. I know I can't show you good profit and loss, but trust me, it's really profitable. Look at my bank
Right.
account.
Right.
It,
Yeah.
it doesn't work that way. It's worth what your financials say it's worth. And that's the unfortunate truth about it. And if, like you said, if you wait until you're in a position to try to sell it and then you try to clean it up, now are they going to take your word for it? Oh, yeah, now you clean it up. Now it looks like this. They want to see that you have this consistent track record that you can prove of what that business is worth. So I think that's a really important one there.
Yeah. And then one thing that maybe I didn't mention was like you just touched upon is clean, right? They don't want to see a whole bunch of transfers going out to another business where you're loaning money and then money's coming back. Like you really do, if you're running a successful business, it has to stand on its own. It's got to be as clean as possible. So there's ways to take money out of the business through distributions and invest it in other places, but just transferring money from business account to a business account, the buyers don't want to see that.
Exactly.
But just think about just using your real estate analogy, right? Why do people spend so much money on staging, right? Bringing in really nice furniture, staging it, right? There's a whole industry in photographers, right? Who are experts in taking pictures of houses, right? Again, it's the story of that house, right? Somebody's got to see themselves living that house. And same thing for a buyer. They have to see themselves running that business. They have to see themselves making much more money with that business. And that's really why they're going to be paying you a premium.
Exactly. Yep. That's exactly right. So one last thing I want to touch on, and you mentioned this, the idea of multiples and EBITDA. When someone's selling a business, let's just break it down. If they've never thought about this or looked into it, what is a multiple and how does that tie into what selling your business?
Yeah, sure. I'll try my best to summarize business valuation in a minute or two. But essentially, the first thing they're going to want to see is EBITDA, right? EBITDA is essentially your net profit exiting out your amortization, your interest, your income taxes and all that stuff. They want to see what's your pure income, right? And then your multiple off of that is just basically, what that company's worth comparatively to the net income. And that's where the negotiation begins. That's a very industry specific situation. But two is that I think people need to also look outside of their profit and loss statement, and they need to look at what's their balance sheet, right? And look at what assets do you have? What are some of the business assets that are worth something, right? Most people gravitate towards client lists, client relationships, lifetime value of your customer. But really, sometimes it could be domains, right? The IP piece, domains, processes, what kind of processes? Maybe you have an app that you've built for your clients to interact with your business. These are all assets that are worth something that could push that multiple higher. And then lastly, I think one thing I really see is important, and that's your CRM system. And what does your list of prospects look like? How many people are you interacting with? If you have a relatively small list or you have no list at all and you're spraying and praying, like obviously the company will be worth less. But if you have a list of 300,000 people in a specific industry that you're talking to on a regular basis, whether it's a newsletter, blog, whatever, like that's worth something, right? That's worth something to a buyer. So just again, just thinking, what are some of my assets, whether they're on the balance sheet or off the balance sheet, that could really help my multiple. So that's business valuation 101, according to Ron Parisi. One, looking at net income and not just last year's net income. What have you guys been doing the last 5 years? What does that trend look like? And then two is, what are some of the other assets of the business that could really help the buyer be more successful? And let's be honest, the buyer's always going to want to be more successful than you currently are. They're looking for, what's the money left on the table that I can come and I can help this company be more successful?
Yeah, I'd say to sum it up for me, if you wanted to get just a general idea of what you might be able to sell your business for, you start with your profit and you'll get to put some things back into that, like you mentioned, depreciation, interest, things like that. Get that number, then find out what the multiple is for your industry. So for tax repairs, for example, it could be a multiple of 1 to 1.5 times that number, right? So if your business does $500,000 in EBITDA, maybe you can get 500,000 to 750,000. Right. And then within that range, that's when you start looking at those things like those assets and your CRM and all these intangible things you have. So maybe you can get to the top end of that multiple or maybe even further if you have these things. All those things are important. Those are the kind of the things in my mind that you look at and at least gives you an idea.
Awesome. Hey, Josh, always a pleasure being with you. thanks. Until next time, hopefully people find this helpful, and we're going to continue to keep these great topics going. So thanks.
Awesome.
Thanks for joining us today.
Yep.
Appreciate
See
it.
you next week.
All right. You take care.